Hi everyone, my name is Osherove. I'm the author of the book The Art of Unit Testing. Today I'm going to do a test review for the ASP.NET MVC source code, and that usually means I'm just going to look at the test for that. Now, when I ran the test last, there were about 1,500 tests. They were all passing, which is good. I want to start by looking at the form, at the way that things look for the test reader. So there are several things we need to take a look at. First of all, there's an MVC features and the tests for it, system web MVC and the tests for that. Then there's a unit testing utility, which is basically infrastructure of various helpers. I'm definitely okay with it. Now, the structure inside the MVC.test, kind of weird, but not that bad. Under MVC, there is the Ajax, HTML, and test. Under Ajax, there's the test folder. Under HTML, there's a test folder, and under test, there's just the other tests. Okay, I'm not sure the test folder is needed, but in any case, I just want to say that compared to previous reviews, the tests for the system web MVC are some of the best tests that I've seen from the Microsoft world. In fact, I would highly recommend that people who want to look at examples of good unit tests look at these tests as very good examples of clear, readable tests. And mostly I can say that I've had quite a hard time looking for real big problems in the test. It took me some time. I did find a few, but overall the state of the tests and the readability and maintainability of them is very, very good. So kudos to the team who did the MVC stuff and the unit tests. You've clearly worked with an expert to do these things. The readability is great, the maintainability is great. There are some gotchas that I'm going to go through, and I've made bookmarks of them. Some of them are as small as just naming conventions and stuff like that. Some of them are a bit bigger, where you use multiple mocks to verify stuff. Let's just go through this. One of the first things I want to go through is this. This is a test for URL helper, and the name of the method is action with controller name. The name of the test isn't that great, but what really freaks me out is when I see people doing this in tests. What's the problem here? This is the assert itself is using the plus sign, which means that there is some logic here. And usually what happens is when you use the plus sign in tests, there is an absolute chance that you increase or you create a bug in your test. So I would much rather use hard-coded strings. Now the app path modifier, this is just it. Would much easier to just use this inside the test. So I think that's one little thing that you need to consider. Always use hard-coded asserts if you can. Otherwise, there's a chance that there's a bug in your test. Now, it can actually lead to something else. Sometimes people do this logic because this is the same logic that appears in their own application. So you would see in the application someone that concatenates a string, and then in our test we would see someone concatenating the same string with the same logic to assert something, which is basically repeating the logic from production in our test. So if there was a bug, it would never be found because we are following the bug pattern. So again, this is in this case it's not that bad, but it's definitely, if people see this, they can think, oh, okay, I can just create asserted values dynamically and so on. And no, I would strongly discourage you from creating hard-coded, non-hard-coded values. In this case it's hard-coded, but there's a plus there, so there's possibility of a bug. But many times the app the first part and the second part, at least one of them is unknown at the test runtime, which is kind of a problem. Okay, let's look at another one. This is an even stronger example of the same problem. There's a plus here, and there's the this, and there's a that, and again there's a more possibility of bugs here. Nothing special about the test. The tests are usually very clean, very simple. Let's see, something else. Okay. One of the usually great signs that I have when that people actually did TDD is that in TDD you start with the simplest test possible. Sometimes people miss that. So here there's a URL helper test class, and in there there's a encode related tests. So there is a call to encode, but there is no call to encode with an empty string. And definitely encode should work with an empty string, but no one has bothered to check. Now, if you were doing TDD and looking for the simplest case possible, you'd say, what happens if I encode an empty string? I expect to get back an empty string, and so on. But here there's a single case, test case, that already sends in a URL. So I'm definitely missing that empty string test. This is a helper method that's being used inside the tests. So this is a private factory method, and my problem with this method is that it has a lot of default behavior. Now that's not a bad thing per se, right? You're creating an HTTP context, and it has various routes already created in it, various routes already configured. My problem is not that these things are happening, is that this method name is not really explaining what's going on. So just to show you, there are a lot of places that use this. So URL helper, get URL helper, but instead I would like to say get URL helper with routes already configured, or with default routes configured, something that says to me this is not a simple URL helper. It's something that already has existing behavior. So the reader of the test understands what it is they're getting. Maybe tomorrow we might need to get a default type of URL helper, and then no differentiator in the names of the factories could be a problem. So test readability is really matters. Let's see, we were here, and let's move on to this one. One of the things that I really like about the way they write the tests here is that they're, for example, getting the mock HTTP context and they're sending in false. A lot of times you see false, you have no idea what that means. But they took the time to say include server rewrite var. That's what we're sending in as false. So someone actually took the time and says, you know what, this is really important for readability. I'm going to put this in. But you know what? Maybe there are even better ways for readability. Let's look at the main issue here. The main issue is that get mock HTTP context is a factory method that takes in a flag, and this flag is used here. Okay, if include rewriter server vars. Now instead, so it sends in a different, returns a different configuration of HTTP context based on the parameter pass. Instead, I would actually split this out into two different factory methods, one that's called get HTTP context with rewriter, and the other get HTTP context without rewriter. And then in the test, I wouldn't need to send in any variable whatsoever. So just to get back to where we were, I would like to write with no rewriter. Yeah, no rewriter, and that should take care of my problem here. So always use factories with specific names, with only specific behavior. Don't use factories with logic inside of them, because that makes them even easier to have a bug in them, harder to read, and so on, harder to maintain, etc., etc., etc. Okay, next up, I was here. Okay, here we have a class called default controller factory test. So my main problem here is that there's a static constructor running. That means that before each of the things in the class here happen, this has to be called at least exactly once. And what happens here underneath is that it creates assemblies at runtime. You can definitely call this some sort of an integration test, but since it requires no configuration whatsoever, some people would call it just a slow unit test and put it under a different category. I'm partial. I could go either way. It depends on what you want. But for now, my problem is that there's a static constructor here instead of maybe using the assembly, the various assembly events, and so on and so on. Also, it's not understandable to a lot of people why this is needed. Maybe create MVC assemblies that will be used during the tests and so on. Also, there's the Mvc Test Helper, create MVC assemblies, is only used here. Might make sense to put it in the same test class here, in the same file, since this is the only place it's used. Right now it's in a different file. Now there are some cool things that I really like about these tests. First of all, they're pretty readable. There are some things that I really like. For example, there are specific controller types with bad names and so on, and non-public controller, misspelled controller, abstract controller, and so on. In fact, they're so good you don't even need these comments. Don't bother putting in these comments. And if I just look at where these are used, you can see, look at this test type. This controller type is checking various controllers and making sure that they're all false. Now, I would easily make this into several different tests because, but you know what, let's split this. First of all, it's very readable. Second, there's a problem here. This is where multiple certs can definitely fail you when one is having a problem. So just assume that right now this is failing. It returns true for its control type, null should return false. That means that the asserts here will never run. All these asserts, and each one of these is a separate requirement from the controller type cache. And the code base could be very, very different for each one of these requirements. And that means that if this fails, you will never know what's going to happen here. That means that you're going to get a very partial picture what's passing and what's not, because this is the only one that's going to run. You don't know if this passes or this passes or this is actually true or false. And so you could be looking for the bug and fixing it in the wrong place because you didn't have the full picture of all the asserts. So I would definitely split that out into multiple tests with different names. This is another example of a logic inside the test that creates possibilities of a bug. Okay, so I'll just get back to that. You know, the plus here and all this, very, very problematic. I'm sure that the guys who wrote this test had a lot of problems getting it to work at some point. You know, there are a lot of tests that look like this. And so, you know, just messing out with the strings and all that crap. I know it sucks. That's why I use hard-coded stuff. Let's see. Okay. This is an example of how people solve the problem of not having a row test. Now, a row test is just calling the same test with different parameters every time. What people did is, what they did here is form extension test. It's just a class here, and there's a method called begin form helper, and I'll just show you where this is used. There's a test method here that's actually one line long. Begin form parameter dictionary merging. So this is testing this scenario of merging, but it's not readable because there are several things missing here. It doesn't say what's the expected value. It just says that it should work, and there's a call to a method here called begin form helper. Now it sends in what seems to be a lambda expression with all these things and this thing. Now the problem here is with the readability of begin form helper. If I was to tell you that this was actually named assert begin form helper results, that would make the test a bit more readable. And if I was going to tell you to refactor this so that this is the expected, and this is the lambda expression. Sorry. Yeah, I totally screwed that up. Let's see if Sharper can handle that. No. So it's called HTML helper begin form. You know what? That makes it a bit more, readable for me. Let's see. So what does the assert actually look like? Mock of HTTP context, get the form helper, begin form is basically the delegate that we send in. We call dispose, and then we call verify. Can you understand what's going on here? It's a bit hard to understand. Let's look at this quickly. The verify is from mock HTTP response. Usually verify means that there's some expectation on it. What does the verify expect? Oh, that's a big problem. It goes into get form helper. Now get form helper looks like this. Exactly. I know. It's very, very hard to read. And this is usually a smell that the object model is very, very hard to stub out and so on. Even though it's possible, there are so many seams that you need to take over that the test code looks really, really hard to read. So where's the expect? There's the mock view context. This is the mock HTTP response that's created. Now they're using mock MOQ framework here, so you know that the things that are going to be verified are everything that's called verifiable here. So there are two places here. We are expecting that someone calls write on the HTTP response with form open tag expectation, and at most once with the close tag expectation. Okay. So we are expecting two calls to the write method of the HTTP, and that's basically it. Now, technically this works, but from the readability standpoint, this doesn't work because I have no idea what I'm verifying here. At the very least, I would, my first thing I want to do is to write the comment here that says verifies the begin tag and end tag are written to the response. Something like that. Maybe you'd use an extension method here or something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe we could definitely do the verifiable here, since the form tags begin, and where's the other verifiable here? Here. Okay, so here's how you can make this easier or simpler. Instead of sending in the strings for the form open and form close, you make what you want to do is you want to make the place that does the verifying actually do the expectations. So I would say in this case, just as an example here, there's verifiable here, and oh, come on. Like this, and I would find a way. The string form close here is actually being sent. So So I would actually use this, the verifiable stuff here, where the verify happens, and that would make my tests much easier to understand. So I would know what happens when I verify by doing the expectations here, and then only the act occurs. So okay, from all this, what you should take away is that when you have verify expectations of a mock object, do the expectations on that mock object in that specific test, or the test reader will have to dig through, try to understand what's being verified, what's true, and so on. This is even truer when you're doing this in a method that is essentially a helper method. So that helper method has to be called. So that name of the helper method has to be really, really good. Now, whenever you want to try to do a lot of tests that look the same but expect different variables and so on, and so the tests usually end up one line, the expected value should usually be put into a specific variable so that you understand what's being sent, what's being done. So the lines here are too long. They're too long. Break up the lines, make things easier to understand. Also, you know, there's this plus here. I don't like this again. Anyway, next, let's see. Let's see if anything is being sent here. You know, we have a get form helper here, and the naming could be much better. Who's calling this? There's a form with post action. It says get form helper, but it's not just a form helper. It's a fake form helper, right? It's usually a different kind of form with various mocks and fakes and stubs in it. So you want to have the names of the helper methods be explaining what it is that you're getting. Now here's a problem that's prevalent in a lot of places, and this is a problem of over-specification. Now over-specification is when your test is testing too many things that are internal, when in fact you can either just test one of them, which is maybe the end result, and that will give you the same confidence in the result that everything is okay, but will also make the test more maintainable. So if you change things internally, the test is still okay. But here we have two verifies. So whenever I see two verifies, it means I have two mock objects, and I just want to have one mock object in my test. The reason is very simple. One mock object means I'm testing only one concern. When I have two mocks, I'm testing two things. And a lot of people do this. They abuse their ability to verify things. You know, if I just do, just to make things a bit more readable, this is verifiable, and this is verifiable. So there are two things that I'm using here. There's a mock HTTP context, and there's the mock controller. So I'm checking two things in the test. I'm expecting dispose to be called, and I'm expecting the getting of the response, the header name. Now, all this would be, you know, kind of okay, but look at the name of the test and tell me if verifying these things is actually needed. Process request where controller begin execute throws. Okay? Look at the act. The act is testing using a specific exception helper. That is, you know, that's kind of like using an try catch inside the test, or expected exception attribute, only in a cleaner manner. It takes a delegate and makes sure that delegate does throw an exception. So we're actually testing here that handler.begin process request, when this is called with these specific values, then it throws an exception with some text. You know, the actual test is this one. Now, maybe we do want to verify that dispose was called. Why do we actually want to verify that MVC version header name is called? Why do you want to verify this at all? I have no idea. You know, when someone calls response.append header, that's what we want to. Why do we want to verify that someone calls append header? I don't. I want to make sure that I get this exception with this specific text, even if the calls inside the method change. So this isn't really not needed. The only thing needed is the end result here, and this is the end result. I get an exception. Do I care at what point do I get the exception, as long as the exception text is okay? No. Me as a user, I don't care about these things. And by doing the verify, I'm specifically tying my test to a specific way of work. Now this is prevalent all over these tests. Just look, there are a couple of mocks here. Now here there is no expected exception. So one of them is okay, but the other is not needed. I only need to know one end result. If you want to verify both of them, ask yourself why. Usually every action has one end result. There are no two end results. If there are two end results, they could be combined into one bigger end result that you can check somewhere. So don't do two verifies. There should be only one verified test on only one mock. The rest should be stubs. Let's see. Same thing here. You're checking on the context and on the controller. What's on the context? What's verifiable here? Okay. This is like the third time I've seen that people are checking that dispose is being called on the controller. Why? You want to make sure that dispose is being called? Write a specific test for it that fails if someone doesn't call dispose. That's what you want to do. But don't do it while you're testing something else. Look, the name of the test is process request with normal control flow for synchronous controller. That's great. So what you're testing is that the control flow is okay. I don't like a test that tests multiple things. You should test that something at the end actually happens. So you could say for this, if we have a process request, the end result is that you get back something that's correct at the result. And instead what you're doing is you're testing that the internal flow. That's over specification by definition. I don't care what the internal flow looks like. As long as the end result is okay, I don't care if it calls this one or calls that one. That's the simple idea. So don't put verifiable. Always when you put verifiable, think about it first. Let's see if there's something else that could help. Another two mocks. Okay, that's another kind of over specification. Also, look at the length of this line. This is, horrible. Break the lines. If you're going to use C#, you have this very nice ability to break lines. So just do it. And again, you don't need to verify these two things. There is an error that you're expecting here. So that's what you're checking. Don't verify just because you have to. Verify only because you need to. Because there's no other way to check the test. There's usually 95% of the time you don't need to use mock objects. You only need to use stubs. Execute core. Okay, let's go. I think I have a couple of more bookmarks. Okay, so we have a class here, and this class is located, this is a helper class. It's located right here, right near the test. Usually I put all the helpers into a specific folder, and in this case there is a bunch of mess. Some of the classes are tests, some of them are utilities. I think that should be enough for now. Okay, so here's an example of a test that's very, very satisfied with itself. The test actually says, when someone calls send with anything that's like this, I want you to say send was called is true, and to call the delegate itself. I want you to execute the delegate that was sent in, which is a callback. So, okay, remember, the logic that calls the delegate is inside the callback, which is part of the test. And yet, the assert that the action was called, that this is true, is okay. But there's an assert that send was called. Now, what does send was, The asserted action was called is not needed because action was called is set from our own delegate here. Okay, we're calling sync with our own object, and we're giving it a delegate that says action was called. But we already know it was called because it's our own test code that calls the delegate. So this is our test checking our test. Maybe at some point they forgot to call the delegate or something, but I don't know. I'm not sure. If you're testing that it's calling the delegate, maybe you should be testing the production code that's calling the delegate and you had no way to do it. But this is just, you don't need this because action was called by default from your test. Let's see, something else interesting. Yeah, why are you using the 98052? I mean, is 1 not enough for you? Do you have to have like a weird number, or is it like a Microsoft requirement? I don't know. I mean, you did so well. Why do you have to do this? Okay. Overall, I really like the quality of the tests here. Just so you know, these are really good tests. There are some, screw-ups small. They're not that bad, but you really need to watch out for multiple mocks in the same test, mocks and that are really should be stubs, multiple verifies, checking the wrong things or checking things which are not needed. Over specification is mainly, I think, the main problem here when you have multiple mock objects. If you want, my name is Osherove. If you want me to review your tests, send me an email to the email written here, roy@osherove.com, my blog, icreliable.com, my book, The Art of Unit Testing. Again, you can see the domain there. Thank you very much. And if you noticed, this time I'm actually wide awake, even though it's noon, so my wife and kid are still asleep. You don't care about that, but some people did, so I don't know why. Okay, I look forward to the next ones. I think the next one is going to be